I want you to remember that no bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor dumb bastard die for his country. Men, all this stuff you've heard about America not wanting to fight, wanting to stay out of the war, is a lot of horse dung. Americans traditionally love to fight. All real Americans love the sting of battle. When you were kids, you all admired the champion marble shooter, the fastest runner, big league ball players, the toughest boxers. Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser. Americans play to win all the time. I wouldn't give a hoot in hell for a man who lost and laughed. That's why Americans have never lost and will never lose a war. Because the very thought of losing is hateful to America.
Americans like war movies because war movies have heroes and villains. Americans love heroes and they love villains. And war movies have both. There's conflict, there's drama, there's violence, there's action, and the good guy always wins. That's the key. I was a reporter at the Hollywood Trade Papers for 20 years. I was the labor, legal, and investigative reporter, and I was interested in organized crime and discrimination against minorities, the blacklist, a lot of things. But this was always something I was interested in because I'd always heard that filmmakers who want military assistance have to give their scripts, and I thought, well, gee, I wonder if there's any paperwork on this. So I started looking into it, and I found that there are tens of thousands of pages of documents, the correspondence between the producers, internal memos written by the military. And I love documents, and this is a book and a story that's really can only be told with the documents. So I just became obsessed with the documents, and the documents are really startling. This is a TV show from the 1950s, a very popular TV show in America called Lassie, about a little boy and his dog. And they did several shows that had to do with the military. And the military had all kinds of suggested changes in the stories. There was an episode called Timmy versus the Martians. The little boy thinks he's contacted Martians, and there was a plane crash.
Look over there! That's not a Martian ship. It's a regular plane. It's coming down. It's gonna crash.
In the original story, the Army came out and did a test and picked up all the pieces of the crashed airplane, and they took it to the wind tunnel and tested it. And they determined that the reason Lassie howled was because she heard a high-pitched vibration in the wing that was a malfunction in the design of the airplane. And that Lassie had now saved the day because of Lassie howling. They knew what the problem was, and now they could fix all the airplanes so this wouldn't happen again. But when they asked the military for assistance, all they wanted was some standard footage of a Cessna airplane, reconnaissance military aircraft. They said, no, we won't help you unless you change the script to make it so that the airplane was not faulty. There's no problem with the aircraft. So these are their notes right here. These are the military notes to the producers of Lassie. We have also reviewed Timmy versus the Martians. We have reviewed the script and interposed no objections, except that we strongly recommend that you change the circumstances of the airplane crash. So they had to change the whole story so that now it was due to icing on the wings that nobody could have predicted. And instead of Lassie saving the day, they just thanked Lassie for helping find the crash. And they don't want children to get the idea that the military makes faulty equipment, because children are the main targets of the recruiting efforts, because they make children like the Army, like the military, like everything about the military, and so when they grow up, they'll want to join the military.
Colonel, this is Timmy.
Over and over, the documents are full of statements where they are targeting children to be future recruits. And the children and the people who see these films don't know that this is an advertisement for the military. They don't know that military advertising and propaganda and product placement has been put into their movies subliminally. They just get the message the military is good. All of them, there's nothing wrong with the military. They make, it's a good place to start.
In the United States, official art is a tricky concept because, in many respects, the state has very little to do with culture here. But on the other hand, there are movies which, for one reason or another, have to place themselves kind of under the patronage of the government, and war movies are probably the best example of that because of the incredible scale of the movies, the amount of extras. You really want to be able to cooperate with the Pentagon to borrow helicopters and tanks and all these things, and the Pentagon can be very cooperative. I mean, there's a tradition that goes back a long way of Hollywood and the Defense Department working together.
The military generally allow themselves to be involved with Hollywood because they're already spending tens of millions of dollars every year on making promotional commercials to try and get recruits, and also to satisfy the public and lawmakers that they're doing a good job, and generally movies are going to show American military personnel doing the right thing. On the other hand, we in Hollywood just want to make a bigger and better movie, giving the audience more bang for their buck, so it's not hard to see what we're trying to get out of it. We try and trick them by telling them, yes, we'll take that out, or no, that's not our intention when they bring up issues or discuss things, or and so on. Or we sometimes give them even scripts that don't have the offending sections in them. They usually know that and turn a blind eye, and it becomes, a negotiation, as everything is in the world.
The vast majority of people around the world have never lived through war. While some have witnessed its horrors, few have actually participated in combat. Most of our ideas about war come from watching movies, above all, American movies. Hollywood has never stopped filming visions of war in all its possible forms, scales, and fronts. Past wars, present wars, and future wars.
These are just a handful of films that went through the Pentagon approval process. This is Behind Enemy Lines, Full Cooperation, G.I. Jane, No Cooperation, Full Metal Jacket, which showed Marines killing other Marines, No Cooperation, 13 Days, No Cooperation, Top Gun, great film for the Navy, Full Cooperation, Platoon, No Cooperation. The military hated that movie. Three Kings, of course, showing the soldiers stealing gold from the Iraqis, No Cooperation. Patton, of course, they love this picture, Full Cooperation. Pearl Harbor, again, full cooperation.
How long is America going to pretend the world is not at war? From Berlin, Rome, and Tokyo, we have been described as a nation of weaklings and playboys who hire British or Russian or Chinese soldiers to do our fighting for us.
I'm going to the war. You just make sure and come back for the both of us, all right?
We've been trained to think that we're invincible. But our people think Hitler and his Nazi thugs are Europe's problem. Does anyone think that victory is possible without facing danger? December 7th, 1941. A date which will live in infamy.
Pearl Harbor was a really boring, romantic view of the events leading up to and the day of the attack. It was a typical Jerry Bruckheimer recruiting poster for the military.
We are at war.
Perhaps the worst thing about the collaboration between Hollywood and the military is not the censorship that goes into the films, but the self-censorship. When you know that you're going to need the military's assistance, and you know that they're going to be looking at your script, you write it to make them happy right from the beginning. You don't even put anything controversial or anything that you know they're going to cut out. The censorship begins the day that you write it. You cut out anything that might be controversial because you know they're not going to approve it, so you don't put it in there.
I mean, it is so terrible that you don't really have to know much history to recognize it's absurd. I mean, some people who don't know anything will think it's history, and this is part of the problem, because if it was called Tennessee, which was the working title, then it's a fictional story, it's a love story, and Michael Bay said he was making a love story as long as Pearl Harbor wasn't too far in the background because he loved to blow up ships. But if you're going to call it Pearl Harbor, then there's a presumption that this is about Pearl Harbor.
In the late 1920s, the American War Department created an office to act as a bridge between the motion picture industry and the armed forces.
We understood that Pearl Harbor was going to be essentially an action picture with an element of romance. It was not going to be an attempt to replicate history as a docudrama. So we understood that. We did not enter into our relationship on Pearl Harbor with any illusions that this was going to turn out to be a kind of Man for All Seasons. It was not advertised to be that way. The filmmakers didn't pretend that it was going to be that way. So we knew that to some extent history was going to be the sacrificial victim in the service of drama and action. But what we did believe, and I think that was borne out quite considerably, was that the film would awaken or reawaken interest in the period and in the survivors who were dying off by the hundreds of thousands. And we were quite gratified, in fact, that up to the release of the picture and long after the release of the picture, an enormous amount of attention, in fact, more attention paid on Pearl Harbor, the survivors, the combatants, than during the 50th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor by a substantial margin. And there is statistical evidence of that because Disney did a comparison. They hired a company to count news reports. And there were like 3 times as many surrounding the release of the picture than the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor.
The The United States has always preferred to see itself as a victim of aggression, rather than the aggressor. The attack on Pearl Harbor became a mythic event in American military history, marking a key moment when America had no choice but to defend its freedom, threatened by enemy treachery and hypocrisy. Even 60 years later, Pearl Harbor provided an obvious subject to make into a Hollywood film.
Films shape public opinion because it's been said that motion pictures and television are the world's most powerful medium. So when you have the world's most powerful medium and the world's most powerful military cooperating, collaborating, and I would say even colluding to give the American people a certain image, a positive image, that will translate into sales. Just like advertising, positive images translates into sales of product. Positive images in movies translates into the sale of the military image, which is a heroic image, an image of camaraderie and patriotism. No other country has Hollywood and the Pentagon both working together to bring this message, positive message to the people.
From the earliest days of motion pictures, the American armed forces understood the importance of encouraging the production of films about war and combat. In helping to make Wings, the first major cooperation between Hollywood and the Pentagon, the military went well beyond its role of technical advisor and became directly involved in the logistics of the production. Between the First and Second World Wars, American war movies celebrated the bravery of its soldiers and gave the armed forces an aura of invincibility.
The military, of course, realized they were going to have to go to war. Film industry did anti-fascist films, but they also realized, again, the glamour of the military, the airplanes. So they made a series of preparedness films. I Wanted, Wings, Flight Command, ultimately Dive Bomber, which is first color military movie, each of them showing how the military was going to prepare to defend the United States. The problem with these films, preparedness films, is that in a sense it lulled the American people into a belief that they were safe. We had the Atlantic and the Pacific, no one was going to attack us. Pearl Harbor becomes so traumatic, it seems to me, not only because the fleet was destroyed, but because it gave lie to all these movies that had been made at the end of the 30s into the 40s. We weren't prepared. We had gotten caught by surprise.
Bye, 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 a bond, and by and by.
Beginning in 1941, Hollywood joined the war effort. By 1943, over 26,000 members of the film industry were serving under the American flag. Never before had Hollywood and the military been so close. Stars traveled to distant fronts to raise troop morale. All sectors of the industry, from artists to technicians, were called to lend a hand.
Bye, bye, bye. This is no time to say you've done enough. This is the time to really do your stuff. And even if you can't be a soldier in the ranks, you can be the guy.
The Army enlisted several Hollywood veterans to film the war. John Ford followed the events in the Pacific. William Wyler and John Sturgis, the aerial battles in Europe. And George Stevens, the D-Day landing. Among these films of undeniable courage and generosity, one in particular stands out as an unforgettable statement about the reality of war. And yet for over 30 years, it was banned in America.
The guns are quiet now. The papers of peace have been signed. And the oceans of the earth are filled with ships coming home. In faraway places, men dreamed of this moment. But for some men, the moment is very different from the dream. Here is human salvage, the final result of all that metal and fire can do to violate mortal flesh. Some wear the badges of their pain, the crutches, the bandages, the splints. Others show no outward signs, yet they too are wounded. This hospital is one of the many for the care and treatment of the psychoneurotic soldier. The psychiatrists listen to the stories of the men who tell them as best they can. The names and places are different. The circumstances are different. But through all the stories runs one thread, death and the fear of death.
This anonymous slate presents the unthinkable. Footage of nuclear disaster. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Dresden. With or without the help of the Pentagon, Hollywood carefully steered clear of these problematic subjects. In the 1950s, a new generation of filmmakers and screenwriters with leftist political ideas offered a critical vision of war films. Several of them became victims of McCarthyism.
There is no justification for his continued existence unless we learn from him how to help others. Care for him as gently as if he knew what you were doing and would feel the pain if you did it better. Attending personnel will remember that good medical care forbids emotional involvement with the patient. Avoid such involvement by remembering that it is impossible for a decerebrated individual to experience pain, pleasure, memory, dreams, or thought of any kind. It follows, therefore, that this young man will be as unfeeling, as unthinking as the dead until the day he joins them.
What happened during the McCarthy era is that film scripts were now being reviewed not just for the recruiting benefits, but also for the propaganda benefits, and especially how films seen overseas might be used as anti-American propaganda. So films are no longer just being considered on their military attitudes, but also on their political attitudes. A lot of the writers, some directors and actors were members of the Communist Party in the 30s and stayed on even into the 40s and 50s. And many of those guys were blacklisted in Hollywood. There's a guy who's still alive, Bernie Gordon, the screenwriter, who wrote numerous films, including Hellcats of the Navy. You were the screenwriter for Hellcats of the Navy. That was the only movie that Ronald and Nancy Reagan were ever in together.
Proudest moment of my life.
Yeah. Now this is the video of it, and you were a blacklisted writer at that time.
Yes, I was.
And your screen credit here on the movie was Raymond Marcus.
That's right.
Your story is set on a submarine during World War II, and Ronald Reagan has a love affair with Nancy Reagan, but she had been the previous girlfriend of his executive officer.
Okay, Landon.
Well, I don't really remember a script from that long ago, but that's true.
Okay, but the Navy was very upset about some kind of problem that this would create in the minds of the viewers. You think there really is a role for the military in determining the content of movies?
You know, I always say, and I've said before, that the Navy doesn't own the ships. The Navy, the Army doesn't own the tanks, the Air Force doesn't own the airplanes. They all belong to the people of the United States and should be made available equally to any film company that has a legitimate use for them. They shouldn't depend on the Army, the Navy, or the Air Force to have the right to use these things. So I think it's terrible that that goes on. But there are a lot of terrible things go on in this country today. I object to what they do with making the Army and the armed forces the heroic characters they always have to be in films, because the whole militarism that's going on today, the whole business about the American imperium running the whole damn world in the interest only of our own oil interests and our own big people and our own profit making and our own power, all of that is wrong. But making the armed forces so heroic and unassailable is part of that.
Throughout the 60s, Hollywood continued to celebrate the military feats and traditional heroism of American soldiers during World War II, the perfect example of a just war. The Longest Day is one of the most important films to come from this period. It represents a high point in the relationship between Hollywood and the Pentagon. Never again would they achieve the same level of mutual cooperation. But these images shot by George Stevens at the liberation of the Nazi concentration camps remain a shocking counterpoint to Hollywood's heroic visions of war.
There's one thing that you men will be able to say when you get back home, and you may thank God for it. 30 years from now, when you're sitting around your fireside with your grandson on your knee, and he asks you, what did you do in the great World War II? You won't have to say, well, I shoveled shit in Louisiana. All right, now you sons of bitches, you know how I feel. Oh. I will be proud to lead you wonderful guys into battle anytime, anywhere. That's all.
Americans on one level deny that they like war and therefore violence, that they're peace-loving people. But the U.S. was created out of violence in the American Revolution. It was preserved in the Civil War. Its expansion came through violence. And then in World War I and World War II, it made the world safe for democracy using violence for good means. And my argument is that Vietnam became so traumatic, not only because we lost, but it was revealed that we really loved violence, and that's one of the reasons we got into the war. You know, we can win. We've always been able to win a little bit of violence, and we've won, and it didn't work. And so it was more traumatic than just that we lost.
Why must young Americans, born into a land exultant with hope and with golden promise, toil and suffer and sometimes die in such a remote and distant place? The answer, like the war itself, is not an easy one. But it echoes clearly from the painful lessons of half a century. 3 times in my lifetime, in 2 world wars and in Korea, Americans have gone to far lands to fight for freedom. We have learned at a terrible and a brutal cost that retreat does not bring safety, and weakness does not bring peace. And it is this lesson that has brought us to Vietnam.
I am Hoang Thi Le from Quang Tri Province in South Vietnam. I have 2 normal children. Hoang Thi Ho is my 3rd child. When I was 2 months pregnant, I was hit directly with chemical defoliation spray. I came to the north, and my daughter was born here. She's mongoloid. The back of her head is flat. Her hands are deformed. She has 3 toes that are too long and 6 toes on her left foot. She cannot stand or walk or talk. When she cries, she chokes because her tear ducts run back down her nose into her throat instead of out onto her eyes.
I think Americans thought Vietnam would be like World War II. I'm not sure the movies made that great a contribution to it. I think that may be an exaggeration. I believe that with Vietnam what happened is that our leaders lied to us. And when you have leaders who lie to you, and they lied to themselves about Vietnam, then the public is going to go along with it because there's a natural trust of the leadership until the leadership proves untrustworthy. Eventually, Lyndon Johnson lost the trust of the country. There's indications that that may happen to George Bush. You cannot go to war lying about why you're going to war.
Hell no, we won't go! 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 Peace now! 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 We got a permit! We got a permit!
Vietnam was a turning point for this country. And the country is still divided over Vietnam. The divide you see in the political system today is there, and that is reflected in the films. That's why, you'll have the John Wayne film about the Vietnam War, the ridiculous film The Green Berets, right? And then you will see an Oliver Stone film, Heaven and Earth, or one of these other films, which really showed the effect of Vietnam on the country. Now, in this country, there is still a view that the Vietnam War could have been won. The people currently in power in Washington, the President of the United States, his cabinet, Cheney, all these people, believe that that war could have been won. They believe that it was okay to lie about the people in order to get that war to be won. That attitude, that view is what's being sold in Hollywood and elsewhere now in order to get movies that are favorable to the United States and to sell the idea that it's okay for young men to go and women to go off and die in war, that that's acceptable. To be a superpower, there's a basic belief that you must glorify war in order to get the public to accept the fact that you're going to send their sons and daughters to die. That is a very cynical way to run a government. And in the end, it will bite you. Because if there's no serious effort to explain to the public why you're going to war, or if you lie to the public, it will catch up with you.
As America sinks into the quagmire of Vietnam, the movie industry begins to lose interest in representing war on screen. After such films as Patton, MASH, Catch-22, and Tora Tora Tora, Hollywood brings the production of war films to a halt. America's defeat in Vietnam leaves the country traumatized and unwilling to address the subject of war for some time, with one exception, the Green Berets.
The Green Berets was a project that John Wayne had wanted to make, and he sent letters, which I have, to Lyndon Johnson asking him to help get the military to assist, which Johnson did. They rolled out the red carpet. They gave everything to the filmmakers for free. The troops that are shown in the movie are real American Army personnel. The guns, the weapons, everything that was, they supplied for nothing, at virtually no cost. There was a congressional hearings on this. A brave congressman stood up and challenged that this would be the way for American tax dollars to be spent. America subsidizing a pro-war film, and in the end the military said, oh no, we had nothing to do with the creation of this movie, which in a sense was true. The idea was brought to Johnson by John Wayne. It started with Johnson. But the military shaped this film from start to finish. They wrote suggested dialogue, they said do this, do that. The military had a major hand, and during these hearings the military basically lied by saying that they had nothing to do with the content of the movie.
But after that, the problem was that the filmmakers did not come into the Pentagon requesting help until after the war was over. Because, again, Hollywood's interested in making money, the war had become controversial, they didn't know when it was going to end, they didn't want films laying around that showed a war that was over. So the issue wasn't how Vietnam changed the relationship during the war, it was what happened afterwards, and what happens afterwards is that the media has savaged the military, particularly the Army and the Marines for their atrocities, etc. And so when the scripts come in, the scripts that do come in, reflect the filmmakers' perceptions of the war. The military argues they're not in any way correct, and therefore there is no way we're going to cooperate.
In 1967, Oliver Stone was a combat infantryman in Vietnam. He was wounded twice and received a medal for gallantry in action. 10 years later, he was a Hollywood screenwriter and the winner of an Oscar. But even after many successes, Stone still had another story to tell. A movie that grew out of his own experience. Stone has come a long way from Vietnam, but he has not left it behind.
Take the pain. Take the pain! I got a bad feeling on this one, all right? Watch out! Rocket!
People say I'm the life of the party 'cause I tell a joke or two. Although I might be laughing loud and hearty, deep inside I'm blue. So take a good look at my face. You'll see my smile looks out of place. If you look closer, it's easy to trace the tracks of my tears.
The first real casualty of war is innocence. The first real movie about the war in Vietnam is Platoon.
I think initially, in an inadvertent fashion, Platoon became a sociological phenomenon. Now, whether it was just that the nation was ready for a healing between its Vietnam veterans and the society that essentially denigrated them, essentially neglected them when we came home, or whether it was just such a terrific film that it brought people out of their reserve. It melted the ice. I'm not sure, and that's not important. What is important was that what we brought to the screen in Platoon served to essentially thaw the freeze that was on between America's Vietnam veterans, their families who knew nothing about the experience in Vietnam, and even those who were against the war in America.
Dale Dye is the most well-known military advisor in Hollywood. He's responsible for bringing credibility to combat scenes and showing actors how to behave as soldiers with precision and realism in contemporary war films. A veteran of Vietnam, he has become one of Oliver Stone's closest collaborators.
I don't think that Oliver has a critical view of American society. I think Oliver has a disrespect for the American political process, or what it has devolved into. But I think Oliver is a loyal American. I think Oliver believes in this country, and he believes that this country is probably as good as it's going to get. He certainly wouldn't be the filmmaker that he is in any other country.
The film that stands as the most extraordinary testimony of the military experience in Vietnam, as well as one of the greatest war films of all time, is undoubtedly the work of Francis Ford Coppola.
Can't see nothing. We stopping.
Inspired by Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, Apocalypse Now tells the story of the voyage of an American officer up the Mekong on a mission to execute a colonel who has spiraled out of control.
You see anything, Chef?
During his voyage, Captain Willard witnesses the destruction of Vietnamese society, while the American army sinks collectively into madness, absurdity, and horror. His mission gives him insight into the causes of America's failure. In fighting the war, the army finds itself facing an opponent willing to make sacrifices so great that the only way to break its will is to commit acts of evil and accept the reality of horror and suffering they create.
He was close. He was real close.
Apocalypse Now transforms the Vietnam War into America's collective experience of evil in the name of the great fight against communism.
Whatever was going to happen, it wasn't going to be the way they call it back in the train.
Here's a film that works on so many different levels as a, for the time, complete reassessment of America's involvement in Vietnam and the raison d'etre and the ways in which that war was fought. It's an allegory. It's very much a personal film. It's a film that is realistic in its presentation of the futility of war. It's a film in which we find ourselves being lost in the story, and yet constantly reminded of things that we should always be reminded of, and that is that, you know, war is hell, it's madness, we're better to avoid it under any circumstances. It's the ultimate war movie.
If you're going to categorize pictures that we didn't work on, I would create two categories. Category one is the picture that has the fundamental show-stopping premise. Apocalypse Now, an officer is sent out to assassinate another officer. Crimson Tide, an armed mutiny aboard a nuclear submarine. Once you have a fundamental showstopper, there's really little point in pointing out that the ribbons are wrong or the haircuts are not quite right.
And sometimes little things can be showstoppers. I mean, just one word can be a showstopper. In the movie Apocalypse Now, the showstopper was the word terminate. The military was not going to assist a film that showed one officer being assigned to shoot and kill another officer. So if Francis Coppola had been willing to change that somehow, but by just changing one word, you have to change the whole story. What was his assignment? The military wanted him to change that element Thankfully, he was not willing to.
It's completely illegal, not to mention ridiculous. So again, why talk about, would this other Army officer be playing Wagner? I mean, there's no point in getting into the details of other scenes when you have this one huge problem that no one's going to give on.
Phil Strube has something he needs to do, and that's support the policies of the administration, of the commander-in-chief, the President of the United States, to do those things which will provide an honest look at the American Armed Forces and which will support their mission, and not to do things which are antithetical to that.
Any film that's a good film, I think, will show that war is not the answer. Any film that the military assists always says that war is the answer. And every film that the military assists is worse than any film that they don't assist. If you had a list of all the films that the military refused to assist and compared those to the films that they did assist, it's like night and day. It's just the films are so much better when the military is not involved because you don't have this censor telling you what to write. You have artists presenting their image, not the military's image.
After Vietnam, America enters a new era of peace. The Pentagon invests in technological research, convinced that the safety of its borders and its capacity to intervene depend on technological superiority. Ten years after their divorce, Hollywood starts to offer the Pentagon stories about the technological image it's looking to promote. The film that brings them together once again is fittingly an enormous commercial success.
Top Gun was sort of pornography at its most delightful because here you had this very elite core of good-looking young soldiers, technologically proficient, the very opposite, not slogging around in the mud, getting shot at, but flying up in the clouds and, doing cartwheels and so on. And of course there was, the bombs go off and it is violent, but it's accompanied by, rock and roll, and it's, it's very enjoyable, sort of libidinal and anyway, that was evidently the movie that kind of rekindled the dormant affections that existed between the Pentagon and Hollywood. And the reason for that, I think, is because, aside from everything else, the movie is, was a great recruiting poster, and everybody's forgotten the movie, and yet, when the president wanted to make his victory speech, the mise-en-scène was right out of Top Gun. And everybody in America knew that. And the interesting thing, it didn't really matter. It seemed, oh, that's right. I mean, that was, a triumphalist moment, and they had learned that from the film, or remembered it for the film.
I'm going to send you up against the best. Yes, sir. You two characters are going to Top Gun.
I feel the need for speed.
For 5 weeks, you're going to fly against the best fighter pilots in the world. You guys really are cowboys.
I'm an instructor at this school. I see 20 new hot shots every 8 weeks.
I don't like you because you're unsafe.
That's right.
It's my belief that Top Gun was a milestone picture because it signified the rehabilitation of the military as acceptable subject matter in a positive context. It showed to me and to a great many other people that you could make a film that portrayed the military, the U.S. military, in a positive way and make money and not become a pariah in Hollywood. I'm not saying it was the first picture to do that, but I'm saying it was the most important picture that symbolize that change in public opinion.
Sparkle on. Two soft call. Stop. And sparkle on.
After 10 years of self-doubt, America can make a fresh start and begin to imagine a future that may involve military interventions beyond its borders. When the Gulf War breaks out 3 years later, the American public, with images of Top Gun fresh in mind, has no reason to doubt its victory. It was a highly sophisticated, highly technological war. Having learned its lesson from Vietnam, the American Army took every precaution to control the images which reached the public. No more bodies would be seen, no more direct human suffering. As in a video game, the images of contemporary warfare became clean. Is it possible for the movies to present a balanced representation of war if America dominates its adversaries in every way? Such a demonstration of superior strength makes dramatic tension hard to sustain. Perhaps that explains why Hollywood made so few films about the Gulf War. In the 90s, a new cycle of films imagines all the ways the enemy might sneak through gaps in technology in order to take advantage of the weaknesses of the American defense system. These films anticipate a new era in which war becomes asymmetrical.
About 10 years ago, it just seemed so obvious that the next big conflict was going to be a conflict between non-aligned soldiers and the enemy of so many people in their minds, America. So it's no accident that terrorism was already the front page headlines in the movies long before it became front page headlines in the New York Times.
It's Agent Hubbard, FBI. And what I propose is that you let these people go, and I'll take their place. I'm gonna take your silence to mean that you're considering my offer.
Oh. Oh, God.
London, Belfast, Beirut. We're not the first city to have to deal with terrorism. This is New York City. We can take it.
It's interesting in that if you imagine a melodrama, one needs to have an antagonist, and that antagonist has taken many faces over time. It didn't take a huge act of imagination to be aware of what was happening in Europe, you know, with that kind of radical fundamentalism, and to see that there were so many places that were already dealing with the issues that I was addressing. So I wasn't making it up out of whole cloth, and it was easy to point to that. But the sensitivities of the Arab American community were something that was new and something that the film had to reckon with.
They're attacking our way of life. The president wants it stopped, and there's only one way to do that.
Are you saying the president is prepared to take the necessary steps?
Today, with the invocation of the War Powers Act by the President, I am declaring a state of martial law in this city. We intend to seal off this borough, and we intend to squeeze it.
Do you have any idea what you're starting here?
It's wrong. What if what they really want is for us to herd children in the stadiums like we're doing? And put soldiers on the street and have Americans looking over their shoulders? Bend the law, shred the Constitution just a little bit. If we do that, and everything that we have bled and fought and died for is over.
Don't you ever again question my command, is that clear? I'm not under your command, General. Take a look around, tell me if you really think that's true.
I've aspired to try to talk about violence and its consequences. I've tried to talk about the fact that history is made up of people that there are winners and losers, that there is a price to be paid, and that nothing happens absent its resonance and its consequences. Those films that I have objected to, personally or politically, are those that seem to objectify its participants and exploit the violence and exploit war to suggest that it exists without political context and without human consequence.
Not surprisingly, the Pentagon refused to cooperate on Edward Zwick's film, The Siege. Any aspect of the script that deals with military ethics, the behavior of soldiers and officers in times of peace and war, is the object of particular scrutiny by the liaison officers who look at the scripts proposed by the studios. There are many subjects and themes that draw their attention, and the different possible reasons for denying cooperation constantly evolve.
Often, the special assistant to the Secretary of Defense for Entertainment Media will receive a script concurrently with my office. I'll do a sort of peripheral read where I just kind of get the main points and see where does it have the Army. And that's the first thing I look for, is the first specific Army or military mention. And I'll sort of make notes, okay, we're here. The second time I'll go through and read it with a bit more critical eye. How would that soldier really behave in that situation? What sort of language is this soldier using? How is the soldier viewed by the civilians in the picture? What is the mood of the piece? And I go by it step by step until I can get through it, and it'll be a script similar to this one that's full of notes.
First of all, when we look at scripts, you know, are we conducting damage control? And the answer is absolutely. It's not my role here to vilify the armed forces, because I'm a believer of the armed forces. I wouldn't be in this job if I didn't. And my colleagues feel the same way. Those who are in the military obviously are adherents, otherwise they would vote with their feet and quit. So we are all very much of the opinion that the military is an institution for the betterment of the United States. So any picture that's contrary to that fundamental premise is going to be a problem for us. Now, wrongdoing is a different matter. We would be obviously disingenuous to pretend that there is no wrongdoing in the military. So all we ask is that the wrongdoing not be nihilistic, that it not be tolerated, that it not be commonplace, that it conform to reality, and that you show corrective measure.
The reason the Hollywood producers use the military and compromise their artistic integrity by giving the military approval over their scripts is because it saves money. And Hollywood operates a bottom line business. That's understandable. They're getting a good deal, that's why they do it. The idea of it being used as a recruitment tool by the military raises real questions, because if you're doing this as a recruitment tool, then you have to do a cost-benefit analysis. And I dare say it would be a lot cheaper just to go to an ad agency and have an ad agency prepare ads, instead of the Army trying to get recruitment this way, or the Navy or the Marines. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the taxpayers didn't sign up for this.
I've even heard some military people from time to time say, forget reviewing the scripts. They can write a check, we just work on it. But I don't think that I think the prevailing opinion is that this is the price of doing business with us, is that we will have influence over the scripts. And if filmmakers don't like that influence, they feel they can't reach an accommodation with us, and many do, then we part company. They're certainly free to make the pictures. You've got legions of these films that were made without our assistance.
I just wonder how many of the 600 Americans that have been killed in Iraq joined the military because they saw some movie when they were a kid that they'd say, oh, I want to join the military. I saw this movie and it looks great. How many of the dead 600 Americans joined the military because of some movie that they saw, not knowing that the military was the ones that were behind the scenes manipulating the content of the script to make the military look better than it really was? Once they got to Iraq, it was too late. You know, it wasn't all so glamorous over there.
And when you use the military for propaganda, and the American public sees it all the time, the sensitivity to what's real and what's not real is lost. And because our movies are shipped around the world and everybody sees them around the world, that sensitivity may be going elsewhere. And what happens when that takes place is that when a life is taken, you care a little less. When you lose somebody, you care a little, oh, that's war. You know, we get this sort of very tough attitude. And I'm afraid that's what the movies are doing.
This is the Windtalker script, the original script, and this is page 51 is the character of the dentist. And the description says, bent over a dead Japanese soldier, doing what he does, relieving the dead of the gold in their mouth. And then the dialogue for the dentist is, come to Papa. The dentist twists his bayonet, struggles to get the gold nugget out of the corpse's teeth, sees Helmstead and the rest of the second assault coming to the slope. Well, this was a big problem for the Pentagon. They didn't want anything like this in the movie. This is an internal memo from the Marine Corps Film Office, Captain Matt Morgan, to Phil Strube, saying, page 51, the dentist digs gold from the jaws of corpses. This has to go. The activity is un-marine and more representative of conscript force, like people who were drafted. And Phil Strube, his boss at the Pentagon, wrote back here on page 51, he says, page 51, stealing gold teeth. Yep, has to go. The dentist character displays distinctly un-marine behavior. He is, in fact, committing an atrocity. Well, they don't want that shown in a film that they're cooperating with. So the producers agreed that they would take it out. So the entire character of the dentist was eliminated from the film. It's no longer in there. And as we see from the film, the real actual footage, Marines really did this during World War II. There is actual footage of a Marine with a pair of pliers pulling the gold teeth out of dead Japanese soldiers' mouth. This is the real face of war, not the idealized, heroic version that the Pentagon wants to project. My objection is not to filmmakers altering history. Filmmakers, art is manipulable, and filmmakers can say whatever they want. They can say something is absolutely false. But when the military starts dictating the content of art and saying what history is, and their idea of history, well, we know that's completely false. And one of the great examples is what they tried to do with the film 13 Days. The filmmakers are trying to stick very close to real history. They had the actual Kennedy, before Nixon was taping in the White House, Kennedy was taping in the White House. And we can actually hear at the John F. Kennedy Library website, you can listen to the actual tape recordings that Kennedy was having during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was not good enough for the military. They did not want a real picture of what the military was advising, which would have taken us down the path of World War III. They wanted a much more sanitized version, and they would not assist Kevin Costner and Peter Allman and the producers of 13 Days because it showed too much the real history, the true facts of what happened.
It's our duty, sir. Our responsibility to the American people to take out those missiles and return stability to the strategic situation. The big red dog is digging in our backyard, and we are justified in shooting him.
Curtis LeMay was overheard in the real tapes saying, whispering to another general, what Kennedy is doing, this whole idea of a blockade around Cuba, this is the worst sellout since Munich. He was talking about the appeasement of Hitler. If the generals had had their way, we would have gone to war. They wanted us to attack Cuba with planes and an invasion. And the Pentagon didn't want that to be shown in that film.
We find ourselves in a nuclear exchange. But if launched, those missiles from Cuba would kill a lot of Americans. The very presence of those missiles gives the Soviets first strike capability. Those missiles make a nuclear exchange more likely. And that is why I'm being such a pain in the ass about destroying them and destroying them immediately. Hell, even Mac agrees. And, sir, Given your own statements about Cuba, I think a blockade or a bunch of political talk will be considered by a lot of our friends and neutrals as a pretty weak response. I suspect that many of our own citizens might feel the same way. You're in a pretty bad fix, Mr. President.
What did you say?
You're in a pretty bad fix.
Well, maybe you haven't noticed you're in it with me. Now, General, what are the Soviets going to do when we attack?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing. Because the only alternative open to them is one they can't choose.
You know, they're not just missiles we're going to be destroying, General. If we kill Soviet soldiers, they're going to respond. I mean, how would we respond? If they killed ours, no, they're going to do something, General. I can promise you that.
Those goddamn Kennedys are going to destroy this country if we don't do something about this.
There's little to say about 13 Days. We met with the filmmakers. We walked around the building a little bit. We chatted. I pointed out to them that the script was... Oh, I guess they weren't writing the script at that point. I'm not quite sure. I don't remember exactly where we were. I guess at that point they hadn't written the script yet. And I think I had discussion with the director, and I think he conceded that he was going to take some artistic liberties with history, which is not surprising. That's what everybody does. But when we got the script, we found that it was just impossible. It was so unrealistic. And we sort of did this, you know, my historian is smarter than your historian, and we kind of went back and forth, and they insisted that things that happened that my historian said did not happen, and particularly over some of the portrayals of McNamara and his relationship with the... In fact, the whole White House versus the military. I mean, we felt that the purpose of the military in 13 Days was to serve as a thuggish, malign presence against which the Kennedys could glow in contrast.
This is a letter from Phil Strub to the producers of 13 Days from July 1998, where they told them that they're not going to give them assistance for this film. They're saying that they won't help them because both General LeMay and General Taylor are depicted in a negative and inauthentic way as unintelligent and bellicose. But in fact, that's exactly what they were. The two generals were very belligerent. They wanted to go to war. They wanted to attack Cuba. The record is clear on that because they have tapes showing it.
I think you can go back and forth with Curtis LeMay as you can with Patton and some other characters. As a matter of fact, somebody told me that he had a neurological disorder which caused him to frown, and that he wasn't truly frowning. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's just one of those things that tells you that there are nuances here that are often overlooked. Now, Patton is a picture we worked on, and I've heard Patton described as a film that pleased Patton's foes and his admirers because it portrays him as a nuanced character. And so I guess we often would like to have nuanced characters, not the one-dimensional ones that we so often are served up.
The biggest problem they had with not getting military cooperation was how are they going to shoot this picture in all these jets? So they had to actually go to the Philippines. They had some old 1962 era American jets over there, but they were all just broken down pieces of junk. And so they actually had to get a tractor and drag these planes around on the tarmac and pretend that they were flying and have people sitting in them and shooting the pictures. But it was a great expense and great cost, and you can't even get standard military stock footage from the Pentagon unless they say okay. And this is, you know, public information, but if you want a missile taking off or a jet flying from that era, you have to submit your script to the Pentagon just to get stock footage.
The United States established the First Amendment of the Constitution as one of the keys to the American system of democracy.
It's important to note that when the framers created our Bill of Rights, the very first thing they guaranteed was freedom of speech and freedom of the press in the First Amendment. The United States protects speech to a level that I think is unprecedented around the world, that we have shortcomings. But one thing that we can point to with pride is the First Amendment. And the courts have historically always been highly protective of the First Amendment. The problem is one of method, in that the military wants to shape the message, but they know that they can't do it directly. They can't use a stick. If they go after a filmmaker who puts together a negative film, the courts will immediately shut them down. So instead of using a stick, they dangle a carrot. And they say that if you work with us, if you change your film, we'll save you millions of dollars. We'll give you access to aircraft carriers, film footage, U.S. personnel. We'll even set off ordnance so it looks like a real war instead of those computer-generated things.
The Pentagon is like a giant white shark, that public relations machine over there. It just moves through the water, looking at targets of opportunity and going snap, snap, snap. And that's not going to change. Congress's interest is they want to look patriotic and they want to get reelected, so they're not going to stop it. And the commercial media, which, by the way, due to the vertical integration of the media, the fact that these media companies that now own the movie studios, now own the TV networks and the book publishers, are looking much less critically at all these issues because they can profit by this. So there is no large opposition to what they are doing. And therefore, I think it may get worse. And the only thing I can tell the viewers, the people who are the end users of these products, is when you see these kinds of films, understand you're looking at government propaganda.
Is the American will in favor of our involvement in these pictures? I have no way of knowing because there's never been any surveys. But I can tell you one thing. Their elected officials are certainly not opposed to it because it's nothing that we keep quiet or secret. We don't advertise it. We don't choose to try to be prominent to gain attention for ourselves. The public affairs world wants to stay behind the camera, not in front of it. But there's certainly nothing that we're hesitant about. We're not ashamed of the relationship, nor have we ever heard any complaints or any requests to modify it from the elected officials of the American public. So I can only say that though we may get an occasional letter saying, why did you work on this picture? Why did you work on that TV show? Most of those we didn't. They just think we did.
The point is that the military holds equipment in areas as a public trust. It doesn't belong to the military. It belongs to the American people. Now, if they want to assist Hollywood in making those things available, then they should do it without any reference to the content of the scripts. Otherwise, you get into this role of these individuals sitting in little metal offices shaping American popular culture. Americans have no bloody idea who Phil Strubb is. And yet, he has done tremendous work in shaping popular culture. They wouldn't like it. I mean, if you told them who Phil Strubb was, they wouldn't like it. They wouldn't like what he does or what he represents. But that's the point. Nobody tells them.
I believe that the American people have a right, just as the filmmaker has the right to free speech, the American public also has the right to hear free speech. So when the filmmaker is denied his right to make a movie because he can't get the assistance that he wants, the audience similarly doesn't get to hear that speech. So I don't think it's just a matter of the speaker is denied the speech, but the audience is also denied the right to hear the speech.
I do solemnly swear
to support and defend the Constitution of the United States
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
So help me God.
So help me God.
I was once told by a commanding officer, it's not a question of if we go to combat, it's a question of when. And you have to ask yourself, will you be prepared?
Since no films have come out of Hollywood about Iraq or Afghanistan, the military has decided to take the initiative. After 9/11, their approach to their image has radically changed.
Total team effort, I call it. That's what we bring to the table, Navy Marine Corps.
Navy Marine Corps team allows us to...
People who say that American kids are not tough have not seen my Marines in fighting holes at 3 o'clock in the morning.
The result is this new type of short documentary, made to look like Hollywood movies and intended to be shown in theaters like Movietone newsreels of the past.
12, 14, 16, 18 hours a day or more if they're doing combat in some cases. And they do it with a smile on their face. They want to do stuff that's important for their country.
But in this case, there is no screenwriter or director, not even a journalist, no more intermediaries. It's the soldiers themselves that do the filming, with a camera in one hand and a rifle in the other.
People worry about the youth of America. I don't, because I see the very best of it every day out here. I love the hell out of all of them.
Anybody can take a video camera and point it, but to go out and also to be under fire, as you've seen from the films, you know, that's not Hollywood, that's real. I mean, these guys were going in front of live rounds, missiles, tanks, and it's no games, and there's no retakes, and there's no reshoots. They had to get it, and their mission was to get the shots in the best, with the best visual content of the background to the foreground to whatever that they could possibly get. You know, propaganda is creating it for you to do something. This isn't. This is telling you something that happened. I'm not asking you to do anything whenever you watch this. It's documenting what happened. The goal is very simple, for every person in America to see it. The message, there's people overseas protecting your freedom of speech. That's it. Every cameraman that I've had out and in the field was offered shelter, water, food, love. They were the most caring. The kids would come up with flowers. I mean, they're so happy that we went in and did what we did. Yet the world tells you that America's bad for what it did. But that's why we all live, and that's the freedom of speech. That's what we went in to do. But I've got a closer view because I have 20 cameramen that were out there that saw a different side to what it was all about.
The whole point of Enduring Freedom was that it was a military-produced documentary, so the notion of some kind of objective viewpoint for a documentary would seem to be beside the point of that kind of production. They don't want an objective viewpoint. They want the military's viewpoint of it. I mean, the interesting parallel there is that, you know, this is what happened with embedded journalists. This was the same kind of theory, is that by embedding the journalists within the squads, they'd become part of the military and take on the military's viewpoint. And that seemed to have happened successfully.
The Pentagon immediately understood the technological advances provided by computer-generated imagery. War began to invade games.
Well, what's really interesting to me about specifically this game, and I became kind of addicted to this game in 2002 when it came out. First of all, it was released while the U.S. was preparing to go to war with Iraq a second time. And what's interesting about that to me is that, of course, there's a great deal in contemporary wars of control of information from battlefields and stuff to the media by the U.S. And this kind of interest in getting behind the front lines, seeing what things look like virtually in these games, I think speaks to a great thirst or desire for that knowledge that is not being satisfied by the media. So these games play to that desire, the desire for that forbidden knowledge of what the battlefields look like and what goes on. And of course, we're not getting real knowledge, we're getting this kind of entertainment version of this knowledge that may include real data and ballistics and what a bridge looks like, but the idea that this is somehow anywhere near what real war would be like is kind of absurd. But it speaks to that desire. Okay, so this is the production trailer for America's Army. It's a kind of thing that would have been shown at gaming conventions to announce the product, and then made available online to fan websites for gamers. The Army has been using simulated training, meaning, obviously training based on electronic devices and so forth for many, many decades. But it wasn't until the late 80s and 90s that they really became involved in
training that was based off of commercial games. And this here is the trailer for the game itself. As you can see, it looks very much like a movie trailer, but also like an Army recruitment ad you would see on television. It mixes in documentary footage with images, footage from the game itself, with restaged video footage, and it's created in such a way that it's difficult to tell where one thing ends and another thing begins. If you think about what is the military in a military video game, well, number one, it's access to cool stuff. It's access to cool technology. This is a big part of how the Army is promoting itself in its recruitment ads, is that it's not that join the Army, you'll get to sit in your ass in the desert and eventually get blown up. It's join the Army and you'll have access to the coolest technology you've ever seen. Because of the influence of video games, and because since, say, the Gulf War, the idea of saying war is not a video game, or war is not like a video game, has become a cliche. I'd imagine that directors who would attempt to go beyond video games in some way, like think about the film Black Hawk Down or Saving Private Ryan. Definitely on the part of those directors, there's an attempt to convey the reality of war at a level at which video games may, in some sense, make it unreal. In fact, to make it much more visceral, to make it much more urgent, to make it much more bloody and disgusting.
The movie Black Hawk Down it was based on a real event that happened in Mogadishu. A helicopter crashed, and there was a big fight, and the bodies were dragged to the street, which we saw in Fallujah just recently. The same thing. It was sort of prophetic in that sense. The bodies dragged to the street, same kind of horrible crowd scene.
Somali citizens picked through the burned-out wreckage of the U.S. Army helicopter, the first ever shot down since America landed soldiers in this country 10 months ago. Some Somalis danced jubilantly on top of the wreckage. So far, 11 Americans have been killed. But following today's attack, heightened congressional opposition to U.S. soldiers in open-ended peacekeeping operations is expected.
The military accepts so much realism, but only so much. And when it gets too realistic, then that hurts recruiting. So it's only realistic to a point. The real realism of bodies being dragged to the streets, they don't want to show that.
You could argue that if the military said, we will only cooperate if you don't show Black Hawks going down, then you're in a whole bunch of different situations. Your censorship, your denial of reality, and not even the military could make that stick. So they understood you, particularly after Vietnam, you're going to have some negative images because there are negative images out there. But if the bottom line shows heroism, bravery, and the completion of a mission, they can live with it.
What we saw Black Hawk Down and how we continue to see it, at least as far as I've heard, is as a highly realistic, unvarnished recapitulation of the story as it really was, and not, in fact, a story of our failed mission to capture Muhammad Aidid, which is the way it's so often reported. And on a purely tactical level, this is something that's quite obscure to most audiences, and I'll grant people that. But on a purely tactical level, there was a success. Now, politically, maybe our presence in Somalia is something that can be debated in our hasty retreat. In the aftermath, another thing that can be debated, as was our retreat from Beirut. But those are something for academicians and other people to discuss. From our standpoint, this is what the story was about, the phenomenal capability of those soldiers under those extreme conditions to persevere with ability and with courage. That was our story.
The new realism that's forced on America as a result of 9/11 is having to confront the fact that, yes, the enemy may be fanatical, but they think they're right. You know, they say that, I mean, there's one military theory, which is the only way to win at war is to know your enemy. Now, Black Hawk Down, a magnificently directed and produced film, was a part of the problem, not the solution. Yes, it showed the results of warfare, bodies being torn apart by explosives, but in its treatment of the enemy, a fanatical, brainless, ragtag mob who had little or no humanity and were stupid to boot. It was a part of the old approach to war movies and the pre-9/11 way of thinking.
There could be nothing more poetic, nothing more symbolic than the U.S. military supporting an anti-war film. And that's the great loss. You know, these offices could in fact be the finest moment for our system, to show that the U.S. military is there to protect viewpoints, all viewpoints, even those that don't favor it. But instead it is yielded to this great temptation. You know, Oscar Wilde once said that the only way to be rid of temptation is to yield to it. And that really sums up the military liaison offices. They have yielded to every temptation, great and small, to manage the image that appears on the big screen.
Maybe all men got one big soul everybody's a part of. All faces of the same man. What's your name?
What difference you think you can make, one single man, in all this madness?
You're just too soft-hearted. You're not tough-fibered enough.
Have you ever had anyone die in your arms, sir?
Who lit this flame in us? Because I have you, nothing can touch me. No hurt, no grief, not even death.
From New York, and I have a Vietnamese campaign ribbon, Vietnamese service ribbon, National Depressed ribbon, and a Purple Heart. Right up. Right up.
Andrew Bobby Jack from New York. I have a Vietnamese ribbon for the Bronze Star.
My name is John Morrow, and here's a bunch of bullshit.